So after completing your repair, obviously what you'll need to do is reinstate the pump back into the frame. So to do so, with your piece of timber underneath as a support, what you can do is the same way we pulled it out, is just tip the frame backwards and walk the pump back into the threads, like so. Square the pump up and it'll slide back into the stems of the bolts for you as well. Now, what can happen is the piston from the air motor has come down of its own volition, so it's just fallen down to the bottom of a stroke. So what you need to do is just push the piston back up into the pump body itself. So the air motor piston can be pushed up by hand to enable the bottom of the pump to go back into place. The one thing to watch here is you don't jam your fingers between the two. So it pays to wear gloves and slide the pump back into the body, like so. That's how easy it is. You've got that started there. So you see the pistons come back down again from the air motor. Would I put air over it and lift the piston back up? Absolutely not. Too dangerous, because it could come down with such force it'll smash those two dowels off completely. So with it sitting in place like this, just put your knee, hold the pump and slide the pump back up into the body so that you can get a nut started on there. So you see that you're working against the piston all the time. So again, just slide the piston back up. So it has a little bit of resistance, because what you're doing is you're pushing a piston back up into the cylinder wall, like so. So just take your time to ensure that you've squared it up and you can get these nuts started. So you see I've got stems from the bottom of the threads. So I've got the beginnings of the threads. So to make life a bit easier, what I'll need to do now is just lift that up a fraction, like so. And I do that with the rod I've got underneath it, and look at the body going back up where it should be. Now I can start the nuts. So I don't need all that thread hanging out, but at least you can see what you're doing. So if you want to, you can put your hammer underneath the piece of timber, holds it in place for you, and you can put the nuts back on. So they're coarse thread, nylock nuts, quite easy to install. So from here, where do I go? Do I put the collets back on? Do I do these up? I suggest you do these up first and get this body back in those stems. So with your long series socket, righty tighty, lefty loosey, I start winding it back up. Now, to screw this up, I won't screw this one all the way because it'll jam on that shoulder. So take them all up slowly, and you'll find there'll be some resistance from the nylock nut when you get so far up. As you can see there, there's the resistance. So just wind them up by hand until you can't wind them anymore, and then do the rest with the spanner. So what you're watching is the body coming up to these little steps on the stem bolts. So as you wind it up, keep it in sequence. So again, just wind them up until they're about even. Stop, come over this side. Same, round the back. So by pulling it up square, there's no chance of them pinching. Like so. So now they've started in the recessed section of the bolt. They're not going to pinch. So I can take them all the way home now. There we go. Just about to kiss the surface. Pull pull that one up tight, and same. Now, start from the back one, because it's a tripod arrangement. Back one tight. You don't have to swing off it. Front one tight. And this last one, nice and tight. So now the pump is secured back in the body. So look what it's done to these two dowels here. Both of these are nice and square because the bolts have come up square. So now I can get the collets back on. So if I try to put the collets back on with the pump crooked, these two dowels here wouldn't align and make it very awkward for me to put the collets back on. So remember I said about this bell that holds the collets, or the keeper for the collets? Because I put it on there first, it's there ready for me to be able to utilise without having to pull the whole thing off because I forgot it. So which way do they go? The wire's on the bottom of them. So obviously if I put the wire and the dowel at the top, the bell won't come over. So of course they face down. So you see, all they do is they're designed to slot over the two dowels, and the collet slides in as such. So you've got two sides kissing there, slide it around, two there. The bell will slide over the top of them without any resistance, like so. So if the cover won't go on like this, that means you've got something wrong. So just stop, have a look, make sure they've got it right, and then that'll slide down over the top. Now this pin goes in over the top and pushes through. Now if you're concerned that that's a little bit loose, what you can do is with a pair of pointy nose pliers, you can actually squeeze them home a little bit without jamming your fingers. Fingers clear, squash, squash, squash. And now it's got a bit more resistance. So the chance of it coming off, pretty remote. Just make sure you slide that piece of stainless steel wire down to the bottom of the stroke. Don't have it up the shaft because it can damage the steel on the air motor. So we've reinstated our fluid pump. With a lot of these pumps there is a retainer for the pin that I showed you that holds this bottom barrel section in place. Sometimes it breaks. If it breaks, don't be too concerned. Look, this one's previously been broken. It's come out of the eyelet. What you can do is you can tie that back onto the pin if you wish to. So the pin around the back, you can just tie that piece of wire back onto the pin so you don't lose it and the wire doesn't encumber the operation of the pump itself. So now that we've put this back in place, it's in situ, level it back up again. So take your blocks out of the way, like so. So it's sitting down on all 4 points. Obviously for safety reasons, because if you left one side up, it could tip over on you. Separating oil. Flood that wet cap with oil, and you basically want the oil to come right to the top of that so that you can see it floating around that area. So what that does is any dust or contamination sits on the top of the oil and won't go down into your oil cap. So the one thing we've got left to do here now is, now that we've secured this, we can work on this section here. So remember, you put new O-rings in there, and you've also cleaned your shims, the 3 shims. So there we are. So if I missed the shim out, I'd be at 9 o'clock. If I missed 2 shims out, I'd be at 3 o'clock. So that's why those shims are there, to put that in the appropriate place. So again, you need to tighten that up. So a block of wood, that's it, it's sealed. Now if I didn't have that tight, or the seal was missing on the bottom of the cylinder, that'd suck air. Remember, an airless pump can't suck air. So the only thing that needs to go back on now is the suction hose that screws back on there. And it doesn't hurt to put a little bit of anti-seize on that thread and screw that suction hose back on there. So that's pretty much your fluid pump. Your fluid pump's been rebuilt, you know that it's good to go. So the first thing I'll put through this machine before I try and or attempt to utilise it for spray painting is, of course, all that lubrication we've put on those packings, the piston, on the seats. It all has to be flushed out. So ultimately what you do is, so that you can reinstate pressure into the pump, is reinstate the hose. Now the outlet on that is 1/2 inch down to 3/8, so it's a reducing nipple, and that's a 3/8 hose we're running on them. Predominantly these airless pumps run on a 3/8 primary and a 1/4 secondary hose. So there you go, I've tightened it up. Now, you'll notice that when I tighten it up, the hose doesn't move anymore. So just a tip for young players, that's a tapered seat, as is that. So they're a married set. This nipple is a parallel thread. Because it's a parallel thread, that is the only thing that I would put thread tape on or thread sealant. Hoses do not have thread tape on them at all, because the thread tape can impede the thread and stop this from seating into that married set. So the olive won't go all the way home. So if you put thread tape on there, you're asking for trouble. It's dangerous. No thread tape on hoses and fittings. So screw that back up again. The thread must always be clean and non-impeding or damaged, because if the thread's tight on that nut, there's something wrong. Stop and start again, particularly with airless hose, because if it's going to blow out anywhere and you haven't screwed that up properly, where it doesn't seal properly in the olive, you'll have fluid come out through that gap. So you don't have to over tighten it, just nip it up and the hose is right. Now, if I think to myself, hang on a minute, that hose is in the wrong configuration, it seems to be taut the wrong way. Undo that again, appropriate your hose around the right way and nip it up again, so that it's not trying to work against the way you're trying to operate it. So do I hold this section here with a pair of multi-grips or anything? No, you'll nip it up. The one thing you will need to do is put an alternate spanner on this so that you hold the two of them still while you nip that up. So to flush this pump, what I'll do is I'll open this dump valve and I'll get the unit to suck the solvent up. Remember, you've just rebuilt it, so there's nothing in here. It's not pre-primed, nothing in there. So by alternating the regulator, and you're the operator, you're the one that does this, not somebody else, you're the one that's operating this, so you'll alternate that regulator to appropriate enough air to drive the air motor slowly for the unit to suck. Now you'll need to let the pump run about 4 or 5 strokes, up and down, stop, then start that action again, repeat that action, wind the regulator down 4 or 5 pumps, and you'll continue to do that until solvent escapes from this capillary tube off the dump valve. By stopping and starting, you're not getting the packings too hot, and you're giving the foot valve time to settle and suck up the solvent that you wish to run through this pump. One other feature that you need to be conscious of with these pumps, if you have a big hose, a big airless line, 3/8 or 1/2 inch, and a large tip in the gun, and when I say large, you're getting up around 27 to 31s, you'll have a lot of volume come through this pump. So one feature with these pumps is that they tend to ice up because you're running on air. So the pneumatics of the pump have a lot of moisture drawn through from the air from the compressor. There's a de-ice feature on this particular unit. What you'll do is, and can do during operation, is to open that valve